Friendship and Love. This presentation is brought to you by Amisha Mangal, Alyssa Marcel, Janelle Ali, Kiana Williams, and Liana Maharaj. It is based on Chapter 9 of Psychology Applied to Modern Life, entitled Friendship and Love, for the course Psychology of Adjustment. As per Wheaton et al. 2015, close relationships are important, interdependent, and long-lasting, characterized by partners who are irreplaceable rather than interchangeable, for example, friendships and romantic relationships, and they elicit both positive and negative feelings, behaviors, etc. Our chapter includes 5 components: relationship development, friendship, romantic love, the internet and relationships, and loneliness. Our presentation also presents an application where we discuss preconceptions, misconceptions, and changes that we will apply based on elements of the presentation that stood out to us. Component number 1: Relationship development.
Initial encounters. People become aware of their mutual attraction, usually triggered by each other's looks and early conversations. The 3 factors include proximity, familiarity, and physical attractiveness. Proximity refers to geographic, residential, and other forms of spatial closeness. Familiarity is the mere exposure effect or an increase in positive feelings toward a person based on frequent exposure. And physical attractiveness is the attractive physical features and physique of a person. Application. What stood out to me is initial encounters. Why? Because persons are strongly influenced by looks, closeness, and similarity. Preconceptions or misconceptions. I wasn't aware that these factors such as proximity, familiarity, and physical attractiveness played such an essential role to persons as it relates to initial encounters. Behavior modification. I am more aware now how these factors contribute to attraction because persons view them as common traits that will make them more compatible. Getting acquainted. After several initial encounters, persons begin getting to know each other. The 2 main factors include reciprocal liking, which is liking those that shows that they like you, and similarity, as it relates to demographic characteristics such as age, race, religion, socio-economic status, and education. Also physical attractiveness, intelligence, and attitudes.
Maintaining relationships. How are relationships maintained? Studies suggest that maintaining relationships through spontaneous acts of care and communication have shown importance in fostering a healthy environment for that relationship to thrive. Some psychological strategies used to do this are: 1. The expectancy effect, also known as the I know you can do it effect. Psychologist Robin Rosenthal demonstrated that by holding positive expectations about another's behavior, we can subtly influence their behavior in a positive way. Another strategy that can be used is positive social support. Giving positive support during stressful situations can help loved ones cope. Listening and being empathetic are ways in which this can be done. The third strategy is the norm of reciprocity, often referred to as one good turn deserves another phenomenon. This suggests that if someone does us a favor, we feel obligated to return it. This is why oftentimes when we receive a compliment from a loved one, we feel compelled to return it. The fourth strategy refers to cognitive reframing. If a loved one is going through a stressful time, try providing them with alternative positive views on the situation. The other strategy listed is empathic listening. The goal of empathic listening is to allow your partner to share their feelings, thoughts, and concerns without commenting or providing suggestions. It is important to simply focus on gaining an understanding for your partner's emotions and concerns in that instance. Number 6 is unconditional positive regard, which was developed by Carl Rogers, refers to accepting and supporting loved ones regardless of whatever decision they have made in their past. And lastly, we have the model of forgiveness. In any relationship, it is important to understand that we all deserve forgiveness. And most importantly, we must maintain this forgiveness throughout the duration of our relationships. The topic that stood out to me was maintaining relationships. This is because in my own personal life, the friends I currently have are the same ones that I've had since I was 5 or 10 years old. And naively, I thought regardless of what we went through, we would always remain friends because we've been friends for so long. It wasn't until a recent disagreement in my friend group that I realized that even though we've always gotten along, it is important to ensure that as the friendship evolved, the methods used to ensure the friendship remained needed to as well. This is where the strategies previously mentioned came into play. Relationship satisfaction and commitment. One's satisfaction in a relationship is an important factor when considering if a relationship is worth maintaining. One theory that can be regarded when discussing this is the social exchange theory. The social exchange theory simply states that social behavior is a result of an exchange process. People tend to weigh the potential benefit and risk of all social relationships. And if that risk outweighs the reward, the individual will decide to forgo the relationship.
Component number 2, friendships.
Now we move on to the component of friendship. The first subcomponent under friendship is what makes a good friend. An approach to this question comes from a cross-cultural study that was carried out in England, Italy, Japan, and Hong Kong. The diversity of this sample resulted in agreement as to how friends supposed to behave. There are 6 informal principles in governing a friendship, which are sharing good news, providing emotional support, helping in times of need, making each other happy, trusting and confiding in each other, and standing up for each other. Researchers also found that there are 3 themes that assist in understanding the nature of friendship, which are emotional dimension of friendship, which includes self-disclosure, expressing affection, and support. The second theme is communal nature of friendship, which includes participating in or supporting each other in mutually shared activities. And the last theme encompasses sociability and compatibility, which refers to friends as sources of fun and recreation. The topic of what makes a good friend stood out to me because I wanted to learn more about what a good friend should be like. The misconception that I had is that all friendships that I make will last forever. But that is not always the case because sometimes negative things happen between friends and it may cause the friendship to eventually break. But as I learned the principles and the themes of what makes a good friend, I can now practice it as well as I can pass on the information to my friends so that we both get a better understanding of what makes a good friend so that our friendship can be strengthened.
Conflict in friendships. In friendships, conflicts are inevitable and may result from changes in interests over time, incompatible goals, mismatched expectations, opposing viewpoints, differences in schedules, and gossip and/or he said, she said situations. And I'm sure that we can all relate to this list on some level. However, the severity of the conflict can determine whether or not the friendship ends. When facing conflicts in friendships, Khan 2009 proposes 3 steps in friendship repair rituals. Step 1: Reproach. The offended party acknowledges the problem and asks the offender for an explanation. Step 2: Remedy. The offender accepts responsibility and offers a justification, concession, apology, or a combination of these 3. Step 3: Acknowledgement. The offended party acknowledges the remedy and the friendship progresses. This process is not compulsory, as either party is free to stop the ritual and dissolve the friendship at any stage. The 3 step repair ritual is what stood out to me in conflict in friendships. It was interesting to look at because in a real life situation, it feels so much more complex and complicated to go through those processes. To see it here put so simply, it was really interesting to look at. In terms of my preconceptions and or misconceptions, when I was younger, I thought that real friends would not allow things like changes in interests over time, incompatible goals, and mismatched expectations to weaken their bond. However, as I got older and after reading this chapter, I now understand as we mature, these circumstances are inevitable, and I'm now much more understanding and respecting of my friend's personal life, time, and responsibilities. Component number 3: Romantic love.
Gender and sexual orientation issues. Though characteristics of friendships remain the same regardless of gender, there are some notable differences. These differences have little to do with our biological makeup, but more so our cultural influences. These influences have subconsciously dictated the way in which we are socialized, as well as the gender roles in which we subscribe to. This has resulted in the theory that men build friendships through shared interests, while women form connections through personal conversations. This clear distinction is a result of gender socialization. Women, from an early age, are encouraged to express themselves emotionally, while young boys are told to do the opposite. As a result, connections between men as opposed to women seem to lack as much intimacy and closeness. Studies have shown that this is a result of 3 things. 1. The stigma attached to homosexuality. 2. Men are told to be self-sufficient. 3. Traditional gender roles encourage men to see each other as competition. Unlike heterosexual relationships, homosexual connections tend to be more complex, as most gays and lesbians who were previously in a relationship tend to remain friends long after they have broken up. This may be because homosexual social networks are much smaller than heterosexual social networks, and therefore they rely on each other for long-term support.
Sexual orientation and love. Sexual orientation refers to a person's preference for emotional and sexual relationships with individuals of the same gender, the other gender, or either gender. Heterosexuals seek emotional, sexual relationships with members of the other gender. Homosexuals seek emotional, sexual relationships with members of the same gender, and bisexuals seek emotional and sexual relationships with members of both genders. Many studies of romantic love and relationships suffer from heterosexism, which is the assumption that all individuals and relationships are heterosexual. Most questionnaires on romantic love and romantic relationships fail to ask participants about their sexual orientation. Thus, when the data is analyzed, there is no way to know whether subjects are referring to same or other gender romantic partners. Further, research on same-sex relationships tends to focus on white middle-class Americans. What stood out to me was the heterosexism in romantic love and relationship studies. The misconceptions that I had were that I always assumed in studies regarding love and relationships that sexual orientation would have been taken into consideration while doing these studies. So now moving forward, my behavior modification will be to now recognize that most researchers just assume the participants are heterosexual, and therefore the assumption will skew the data when it comes to homosexual relationships.
Gender differences. Does gender dictate the way we express love? Stereotypes typically state that women are more romantic than men. This is scientifically not true when in actuality, men are the more romantic gender, and men tend to fall in love faster. On the other hand, women oftentimes associate being in love with physical comparisons. Example, floating on a cloud or falling in love.
Theories of love. Sternberg's triangular theory of love. According to Sternberg, 1986, all interpersonal relationships are made up of three components: intimacy, passion, and commitment. Intimacy refers to the feelings of closeness, connectedness, warmth, and attachment for loved ones. It consists of emotional support, concern about welfare and well being, self disclosure, etc. Passion refers to the intense, positive, and negative feelings experienced in love relationships. It consists of romance, physical attraction, sexual acts, and jealousy. Commitment refers to the decision to maintain a relationship despite difficulties that may arise. Commitment has two aspects: a short term aspect, which is the conscious effort to love someone, and a long term aspect, which is the determination to make the relationship last. Sternberg proposed 8 types of love that can be formed through different combinations of the three components that we just discussed. Number 1, non-love. All three components, intimacy, passion, and commitment, are absent. For example, the relationship you have with your mailman, you don't really have any, so those components are absent. Number 2, romantic love. Intimacy and passion are present, but commitment is absent. For example, the relationship you have with a boyfriend or girlfriend. Number 3, liking. Intimacy is present, but commitment and passion are absent. For example, the relationship you have with a friend. Number 4, fatuous love. Commitment and passion are present, but intimacy is absent. For example, the relationship you have with a boyfriend or girlfriend. I'll explain why in a little bit. Number 5, infatuation. Passion is present, but commitment and intimacy are absent. For example, that stranger that you saw that you thought was so attractive. Number 6, companionate love. Commitment and intimacy are present, but passion is absent. For example, the relationship you have with a best friend or someone really close to you. Number 7, empty love. Commitment is present, but passion and intimacy are absent. For example, think about the older generation, your grandparents or great grandparents. They would commit to the marriage despite loss of the other two components. And number 8, consummate love. All three components, intimacy, passion, and commitment, are present. This is the ideal form of love, and it is easy to achieve actually, but difficult to maintain. So, for example, with fatuous love, that type of love could have once been consummate, but they lost the aspect of intimacy. An advantage to Sternberg's triangular theory of love is that it's applicable to homosexual relationships as well. However, it does not capture the complexity of love. Sternberg's triangular theory stood out to me, in particular the 8 types of love. I thought it was really cool to see the 3 different components in different combinations, and I feel as though intimacy, passion, and commitment hold a lot of value. In terms of my preconceptions and or misconceptions, I never really thought about my own relationship and the relationships around me as it related to the 8 types of love. However, now that I know this information, I will examine my own relationship and improve in whatever area is lacking, as well as examine other relationships so as to better understand their dynamics.
Attachment theory of love. According to Shaver and Mikulinza, romantic love can be conceptualized as an attachment process with similarities to the bond between infants and their caregivers. The ideas build on earlier work in attachment theory by John Bowlby and Marie Ainsworth, in which observations of infants and their primary caregivers were made and three attachment styles were identified. The first, secure attachment. This is classified by children who show some distress when their caregiver leaves, but are able to compose themselves knowing that their caregiver will return. The second, avoidant attachment. Children with this style tend to avoid parents and caregivers. And the third, anxious ambivalent attachment. Children with this attachment style are very anxious when separated from their caretakers and show resistance at reunions. So what do these attachment styles look like in adulthood? A secure adult will find it easy to get close to others and trust others, and are more comfortable with mutual dependence. The avoidant adult will feel uncomfortable about getting close to others and fear getting close to others. And the anxious ambivalent adult would be more obsessed and preoccupied with their relationships. What stood out to me was how attachment styles impact adult relationships. Previous to this, I did have knowledge about attachment styles in regards to infants and their caregivers, and I did have a preconception that we may project or seek to duplicate similar patterns of relating as adults. But although I had knowledge that adults mimic their infant attachment styles, I didn't actively think about my own attachment style. So now, because of this learning, I can now analyze my pattern of attachment in my own personal relationships.
The cause of romantic love. According to Steinberg, 1986, as a relationship progresses, intimacy and commitment levels increase, whereas passion levels tend to decrease since they have already peaked earlier on in the relationship. Passion levels include fantasy, novelty, and arousal. Fantasy. Love is blind, and individuals develop a fantasy picture of their lover. However, as time passes, reality threatens this idealized view, and individuals realize that their partner is not perfect and, in fact, has faults. Novelty. As time passes, the feeling of novelty and the newness of a partner and new experiences begin to fade as interactions increase. Arousal. People cannot exist in a state of heightened physical arousal forever. The decline of passion does not necessarily lead to a breakup. Although some relationships dissolve, others tend to evolve. Why do relationships end? The Boston Couples Study of 1976 proposes 5 factors that contribute to romantic breakups. Number 1. Premature commitment. Making romantic commitments without taking the time to get to know each other can be detrimental, as you may soon realize that you don't really like each other or you have little in common. Number 2. Ineffective communication and conflict management skills. Distressed couples tend to have negativity in their communication and poor conflict management skills. This decreases problem solving and increases withdrawal. Number 3. Becoming bored in a relationship. As we just discussed, novelty fades as people get to know each other, and boredom can set in. Balancing the needs for both novelty and predictability can then become tricky. Number 4. Availability of a more attractive relationship. The availability and awareness of a more attractive alternative can lead to a breakup. Number 5. Low levels of satisfaction. Your expectation of your partner, your attachment style, stress, and the above mentioned factors all contribute to low levels of relationship satisfaction. Now we look at how relationships end. The act and decision of breaking up is not as a result of a singular event, but rather it is a process. Duck and Rowley proposed a six-model process describing what partners go through in relationship dissolution. Stage 1. Breakdown. One or both partners become dissatisfied. Stage 2. Intrapsychic. This is where the contemplation about dissatisfaction, cost of relationship, and attractive alternatives take place. Stage 3. Dyadic. Discuss or negotiate conflict. At this point in time, the relationship has potential for repair. Stage 4. Social. Friends and family are made aware of the situation. Stage 5. Grave dressing. The development of separate accounts of the breakup are made by both parties for their own social networks. So at this time, the breakup has happened, and both parties, they tell their circle, their friends, what happened from their perspective. And stage 6, resurrection, preparation for new life. We just spoke about why relationships end and how relationships end. Now it's time to look at several strategies to help our relationships last. Strategy 1. Get to know the other person before making commitments. Establish a mutual ongoing attention towards developing intimacy and self-disclosure in order to foster commitment and enduring love. Strategy number 2. Emphasize the positive qualities about your partner and your relationship. Communicate more positive than negative feelings to your partner and explain your partner's behavior in ways that enhance the relationship. Strategy number 3. Develop effective conflict management skills and communication skills. Learn to distinguish between major and minor conflicts. Learn to view situations from multiple perspectives and clearly voice your problems instead of, sweeping them under the rug. Strategy number 4. Find ways to add novelty in a long-term relationship. Try to engage in new activities to keep the relationship from becoming too predictable. The course of romantic love stood out to me, in particular, how relationships end. Seeing this laid out step by step in a stage process was really interesting to look at because, again, in real life, it seems way more complicated and complex. Yes, we go through those stages, but it's not as easy as it sounds. So that was really interesting to look at. In terms of my preconceptions and or misconceptions, I tend to have issues voicing my problems and prefer to sweep them under the rug because I assume that, it's better than conflict. I'm not a confrontational person, and that's a misconception of mine. However, now that I've read the chapter, I will utilize the aspects of helping relationships last. So, for example, being more intimate, improving my communication and conflict management skills, and so forth, because I now realize the weight that these factors hold in maintaining relationships. Component number 4. The Internet and relationships.
We now move on to the internet and relationships. The first subcomponent under the internet and relationships is developing close relationships online. In recent times, the internet became a huge driving force for obtaining acquaintances and developing relationships. As we know, the internet and face-to-face communication are two completely different things due to the physicality involved in the face-to-face communication. Therefore, psychologists need to reconsider the theories and principles of relationship development. In the absence of physical appearance, similarity of interests and values come into play with regards to internet communication. Studies were done and showed various results between internet and face-to-face communication. For example, one study found that pairs of strangers who communicated on the internet liked each other more than if they had talked face-to-face. Whereas another study was done where pairs were randomly assigned to either face-to-face or internet communication, and the face-to-face group felt more satisfied with the experience and felt a higher degree of closeness and self-disclosure with their partners. Developing close relationships online stood out to me because of the whole COVID-19 pandemic and us being isolated for so long. We now use the internet to communicate and meet people while in our homes. The misconception that I had about developing close relationships online is that I thought you don't learn much about a person through the internet. But after reading, I found out that research shows that you can learn about a person through the internet despite not physically being there with them. And I think that I never tried it before, but I think I should try to communicate with someone online and try to get to know them and develop a friendship with them.
Building online intimacy. Virtual relationships can be just as intimate as face to face ones and are sometimes even closer. However, even though the internet provides self disclosure and anonymity, some persons do fall prey to deception.
Component number 5, loneliness.
We move on to loneliness. The first subcomponent under loneliness is the nature and prevalence of loneliness. Loneliness occurs when a person has fewer interpersonal relationships than desired or when these relationships are not as satisfying as desired. Ways to look at the nature of loneliness, the type of relationship deficiency involved, which includes emotional loneliness and social loneliness. Emotional loneliness develops from the lack of an intimate attachment figure, for example, a young child being away from his or her mother. Social loneliness results from the absence of a friendship network typically provided in schools, work, or church settings or in community groups. For example, a family that moves to a new country and knows no one there. The second way to look at the nature of loneliness is through the duration of loneliness. Transitional loneliness and chronic loneliness. Transitional loneliness involves brief and episodic feelings of loneliness which many people may endure even when their social lives are reasonably adequate. Chronic loneliness is a condition that affects people who have been incapable of developing a satisfactory interpersonal network over a period of years. The prevalence of loneliness in distinct age groups really contradicts stereotypes. The stereotype that old people are the loneliest. But through research, it shows that that stereotype isn't entirely true, as adolescents and young adults are also lonely, especially the gay and lesbian adolescents. The nature and prevalence of loneliness stood out to me because of the whole COVID-19 pandemic and everyone being isolated in their homes. The misconception that I had about loneliness is that older people feel lonely mostly. But after reading this part of the chapter, I realized that anyone can experience loneliness as I don't have one particular age group that experience it. Therefore, I will pay more heed to my family and friends and others who I communicate with. In case they feel any type of loneliness, I can support them and be there for them.
The roots and correlates of loneliness. Any event that ruptures the social fabric of a person's life may lead to loneliness, such as early experiences. A key problem in chronic loneliness seems to be early negative social behavior that leads to rejection by peers. And another is social trends. Recent trends and access to technology actually may be undermining social connections in our culture. While technology does make life easier in some respects and does provide opportunities for developing relationships, it does have its downside. Online relationships that are void of true connection and intimacy can leave us feeling lonely. Three factors that figure prominently in chronic loneliness are shyness. This refers to the inhibition and excessive caution in interpersonal relationships. The second, self-defeating attributional style. It has been found that repeated rejections can foster negative expectations about social interactions. And the third is poor social skills. Lonely people show lower responsiveness to their conversational partners and are more self focused. What stood out to me was the roots of loneliness. I previously assumed that with the rise of social media platforms, that technological advances would actually increase social connection. However, what I didn't realize, but now I'm more aware of, is how much technology has actually taken away the social aspects of many things, like ordering food online, having automated checkout lines. We typically use these things to save time, but on the flip side, it is taking away the social connection and it's replacing it with more superficial social interactions.
In conclusion, we covered the five main components of the chapter: relationship development, friendship, romantic love, the internet and relationships, and loneliness. Each component gave more insight into the processes that contribute to friendship and love, such as initial attraction, conflict, gender and sexual orientation, theories of love, and the roots of loneliness, just to name a few. We also provided personal insight on the areas that stood out to us and their impact on our previous thoughts and our future actions. This brings us to the end of our presentation. I hope it was informative and I hope that you learned something new. Thank you very much. These are our references.